If you're a product manager, you know who your users are. And if I ask you, who's your primary user? You might answer with a role. For example, say you're building some software to help people manage marketing campaigns. You might answer that your users are marketing professionals. But what if you could say, my primary user is Valerie, the VP of marketing for a national clothing brand, and she needs instant insights into which campaigns are performing best right now so she can have her team adjust ad buys. Hi, I'm Laura. I'm a product leader in B2B software, and today I'm going to talk about personas. So as you progress design and development and requirements on your product, there are so many decisions to make and often not a lot of time to make them. So what guides your thinking? A lot of product managers go with their gut, what they think they should do. And sometimes that does become necessary because in the real world, we don't always have all the information we need right at our fingertips. Good instincts really are an important part of being a great product manager. But at the end of the day, no matter how well you know your industry or your users, you are not them. And you can't have all your users in the room with you at all times ready to tell you what they want for every decision. But you can have the next best thing, customer and user representatives in the form of personas. A persona is basically a made-up user, but it's not totally fake. It's based on things you know about actual real-life users, or it should be. And since you can't have a user actually standing there right next to you all the time, or maybe not ever, it is really helpful to have this sort of summary representative user that you can keep in mind throughout the process. What's the difference between a persona and just a role and some demographics? Well, it's mainly detail and specificity. It gets into things like behaviors, likes and dislikes, pain points and needs, what their workday is like if you're doing B2B software, and more. You usually throw a photo on there and make up a name like it's a real person. You do want to avoid getting too overly detailed. I've seen some persona documents that were 4 pages long of just condensed single space type. That's too much. No one's ever going to read that. It is way too much information to take in when you're trying to make a decision. It's overwhelming. I like to keep them to just 1 page. And not only does that make sure that you only have the most pertinent information and it's nicely organized, but it also means that you're more likely to be using actual real world data points that you've gotten from research instead of making up entire life stories for a person who doesn't actually exist. Now, after some of the basic demographics and psychographics, you can start to get into things like touch points, how you expect this user to interact with the product or the company at various touch points. And this, of course, depends very heavily on what kind of product you're building and who your user is. Now, when you're creating a persona, it can be really tempting to sit down at the computer or stand at a whiteboard and just start listing out all the things you think your users are. But that would be a mistake. I'm always going on, and so are most product managers probably, about the importance of data. And that especially applies here. That's because you're going to be using a persona document as a reference for a long time. You're going to base decisions on it. And that means it really needs to be accurate, correct, and true to life. If you build a product based on a persona that you've largely made up in your head, then you're building a product for someone who doesn't actually exist. And yeah, I know the persona doesn't really exist either, but there's a difference between having an amalgam of actual data points from actual users and something you've just completely pulled out of thin air. If you design a product for that latter persona, it's probably not going to meet the needs of your actual users. When you're looking through your research data and outputs to figure out what to use for your persona, this is where qualitative data can come in really handy because you're going to have some real life quotes and things actual users have said. You do have to be careful with qualitative data in that 1 quote represents 1 person, but if you've interviewed enough people and you've done enough listening, you should be able to pull out some common themes and trends among your users that you can use to represent the group. If you find that you're not seeing any trends or nothing particularly stands out, you may need to do a little more research or try to tighten up your product market fit. And you don't have to create just one persona. Especially for B2B software, you may end up with 2 or more personas. You don't want too many, but you can have a few personas based on different types of users who might have different needs, different ways of interacting with the system. If you're finding that you're getting up into 5, 6, 10 different personas, you may also need to revisit your product vision. It might be a little bit loose. So what do you actually do with a persona once you've created it? Well, the first thing is, if you happen to work in an in-person office, you can print it out and hang it up somewhere where everyone can see it. And that's another reason why having it on just one page is a good idea. And that way it is a constant reminder of your users. It's a constant reminder of who we're building this product for. If you are a fully remote office or you have a lot of folks who aren't in person a lot of the time, that's no problem. You can put it on an intranet page or a Confluence page or anywhere where people can get to it very quickly and easily. And then you can reference the persona anytime there's a decision to make. Design decisions, feature prioritization, or any other choices about the product. Anytime someone on the team has a question, the persona is there to help answer it. It will never be quite as good as having all of your users actually in the room with you, but if you've crafted the persona well, it's pretty close. You can also use your persona to create a customer journey map. And that's a topic for another day, but journey maps also need to be based on real-world users. And last but definitely not least, a persona is a fantastic tool for communication and getting buy-in from your stakeholders. If you're trying to talk about your product and you're showing a lot of technical diagrams or requirements docs or a Jira backlog, a lot of folks are going to tune out pretty quickly. A persona is a fantastic storytelling tool. That's your character right there. It makes the user more real, which helps get stakeholders excited. Let me tell you about a time when a persona really helped me out in building a product. Long time ago, I worked with a university to build a system for incoming freshmen to register for classes. And of course, one of the first things we did was talk to actual freshmen who had recently gone through that process of registering for classes. And we also talked to college advisors who had to do a lot of work to clean up messes caused by a really chaotic registration process. So we took all of those findings and we turned them into personas. And for the incoming freshman persona, what we found was most of them were very confused and intimidated by a complicated registration process. They were a little overwhelmed by all of their options. They weren't exactly sure how to structure their schedule or fill their schedule with all the course requirements they needed and things like that. And based on that knowledge, the system we built walked incoming freshmen through the process of registration, one course requirement at a time. It gave only the options that applied to a specific student. And if there were no options, for example, if a student was required to take a specific math course, we would just say, okay, we signed you up for Calc 2, have a nice day. This tool sped up the registration process quite a bit and significantly reduced errors because we weren't letting people pick any old course. They could only pick from the ones that they were actually allowed to take. And it made sure they signed up for everything that they needed to take in order to have a successful freshman year. And we probably wouldn't have known nearly as well what problems to solve and how to solve them without that persona. So that's the basics of a persona. You want to keep it simple, organized, to the point, based on real-world user data that you have collected through actually talking and listening to customers. You want to keep it where people can see it. You want to reference it frequently, update it because sometimes the needs of your users change, and keep using it like any other tool. And if this sounds like something you could use help with, come find me on LinkedIn. I'll post a link to that and my website below.